gaps, inconsistencies, and total lack of corroboration in her story. But relatively few have said that even if evidence could be found that something happened between Kavanaugh and Ford, he should still have been confirmed as a Supreme Court justice. And that's my subject on today's Fiamengo file. I'm Janice Fiamengo of the University of Ottawa. We are undoubtedly in a believe survivors moment, and even self-proclaimed conservatives, civil libertarians, non-feminists, and scientific rationalists have been deeply corrupted by it, regardless of the fact that the presumption of innocence squeaked a win out of the confirmation hearings. Overall, the trend now is towards punishing more and more men in situations where it can never be known what really happened. What if Ford's friend Leland had come forward and said, "Yes, I remember that night. There was a little party." What if she'd said, "I remember Kavanaugh being there, and I remember my friend coming downstairs frantic to get out of that house." She walked out of that house, and she walked all the way home, and the next day, she was a changed person. And she said to me, "Something awful happened. He attacked me on the bed and I thought he was going to kill me." I think it's a safe bet that if this had been the way the story played out, Kavanaugh's nomination would have been dead in the water. The angry cries of the feminist left would have seemed incontrovertible. Republicans like Senator Flake and many others would certainly have voted against Kavanaugh, even though the corroboration of the story would still not have been sufficient to determine guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. And that's my point. When it comes to accusations of sexual assault against men, we've completely abandoned reasonable doubt. We're at a point where any allegation, even one as empty as Blasey Ford's, is taken seriously by a majority of the population, and in which a significant minority is willing to throw out all safeguards for accused men. As radical feminists keep on pushing the idea that women should be believed even in the absence of any evidence, well, it starts to seem reasonable to believe women if there is just a little evidence. And how morally demanding we are when the subject is a man's potential violation of womanhood. Kavanaugh and Ford grew up at a time when alcohol consumption and wild partying were the norm. Even the good students from good families drank to get drunk and engaged in irresponsible sexual behavior, and the only people who objected at the time, the religious right, were mocked and derided by the very same type of people who profess to be so concerned now. The former apostles of sexual liberation are now adamant that we have to inquire into the murky depths of a man's past attitudes and expressions and lapses in decorum, as if those tell us anything useful about his ability now to serve on the Supreme Court or anywhere else important. Of course, the upholders of righteousness don't believe we should ever delve into a woman's lapses from perfect decorum and chastity when she was a teenager. No. We're only interested in whether the man lapsed or might have. Now, let's imagine that Kavanaugh was at the party Ford described, and let's explore what might well have occurred between the two of them, something almost but not quite as Ford described it. Now here I'm engaging in extensive hypotheticals, of course, but I hope you'll see where I'm going with it. I'm not saying that I think this is what actually happened, since obviously I haven't a clue what, if anything, actually happened. But here goes. Let's say that 15-year-old Ford was a little more drunk at that party than she says she was. Let's say she had 2 beers on an empty stomach, and I can understand why she would suppress and misremember how many beers she had 36 years later. Let's imagine that she flirted a little bit with the 17-year-old Kavanaugh before the alleged incident. Let's imagine that she went upstairs with him and his friend to fool around a bit. Not ever explicitly stated, but, they all knew what was going on, roughly. All three would have been laughing. All three were high on youth and music and hormones and alcohol and maybe even a little marijuana. Then things got somewhat out of control. Kavanaugh started kissing Ford on the bed, thinking that's what she wanted because she'd been leading him on. Just before that, maybe she even responded for a minute or two, kissing him back, thinking it was what she wanted, but he was too insistent, too drunk, and she got scared. She started squirming and objecting, raising her voice in agitation. Maybe he tried to shush her by touching her mouth, not intending to threaten her and certainly not intending to suffocate her, but just wanting her to be quiet. His friend jumped on the bed to disrupt the weirdness that had developed, and Ford left the room very frightened. It all happened in just a couple of minutes, maybe even seconds, though it felt longer to Ford. Neither Kavanaugh nor his friend thought anything more of it because it was nothing. They went downstairs laughing without making any attempt to bother the girl further. Kavanaugh never intended to rape her. He wanted to make out with her. And he thought that's what she wanted too. Kavanaugh now doesn't remember the incident, and Ford magnified it into something it wasn't, leaving out her own participation in what was a common sexual misunderstanding between teenagers. This kind of misunderstanding probably happens many thousands of times every year at teen drinking gatherings. And I'm not saying it did happen like this between Kavanaugh and Ford. I'm saying it could have. And that deciding between my hypothetical version and Ford's version is impossible. Yes, I realize there is a big difference between clumsy sexual interactions and sexual assault. But when alcohol, hormones, youthful perception, memory, and ideology are all involved, especially after decades have passed, it is truly impossible to determine the reality beyond a reasonable doubt. And it is appalling that men should be facing prison or having their careers and reputations ruined because a woman magnifies the extent of the discomfort she experienced. And I know that this is happening now, and that women are being encouraged to exaggerate their stories of assault. And it looks to me as if it's going to happen even more in the near future. And a lot of righteous people are complicit in it. Some of my friends believe that we're seeing the last gasps of the Me Too movement, and that the extreme emotionalism and irrationalism are actually good because they'll make reasonable people reject Me Too. I hope they're right, but I fear they're wrong. I think something else is happening. I think that no matter how many times feminist statistics about rape and feminist claims about rape culture, no matter how many times those are debunked, the feminist message is seeping into our bones that men are bad.